welcome back to Continuing the Conversation. Today, we're going to dive into deep research. It's a new catchphrase in the AI world where everywhere you look, there's a new tool promising to revolutionize how we research, discover, and understand. But in all this excitement, I can't help but wonder, are we truly diving deeper or just skimming the surface faster? What does deep research even mean when AI is in the driver's seat? To help us navigate these murky waters, I am thrilled to welcome back Rob, the CEO of CharmIQ. Hi, Rob. Welcome back.
Hello, Shalene. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm happy you're here. Rob, let's start with the term itself, deep research. AI companies are throwing it around from OpenAI to Google to DeepSeek. But what does it actually mean to you? Is it a fundamental new kind of research enabled by AI, or just a repackaging of the existing methods with a techie gloss? Let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll admit, I will come in with some preconceived notions. I actually didn't do the research specifically on this. I didn't even do my shallow research. So from what I am aware of, Google basically last year, late December, I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even November, came out with a product called Deep Research. And from their standpoint, that actually makes sense, right? They have DeepMind, they use deep all over the place in their naming conventions. So they had originally came out with this product, and just a slight side rant, it's always interesting with how much publicity that OpenAI gets around some of these things and how little Google gets on these things. And it's always kind of fascinating, because in this case, no one heard about Deep Research when it first came out from Google months ago. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, when DeepSeek came out, and then we had OpenAI had called it Deep Research, and so forth. So again, we just, all of this started to blow up. So that's where it kind of came from. So I wouldn't read too much into the name. Again, I think the deep notion is just something that's been kind of pervasive in the community. I'll actually look around to see if I can find any other reasons why people would call it, for example, like DeepSeek and so forth. Is there anything specific? Mm-hmm. When we came into deep learning and all those other things, it's really a statement about the depth of these neural networks that sits behind these things. The biggest change that has happened over the years from what was happening in the 60s and 70s to now is really just we have more compute, so therefore these networks can get deeper. So maybe that's where all of this stuff is coming from. But back to the deep research and so forth. So what is it and what does it mean? And I'm going to take my standard kind of unconventional take here, and I'm going to kind of give you where this is all going. Mm-hmm. So what you hear a lot about is agents and agentic, and that's where I believe all of this stuff is going to both stem from and go to, which is how do you take LLMs and turn them into, and stick them in your process, basically. So the agentic stuff basically means, as it stands, there's no industry standard on this term yet, which is a really struggle for a lot of people, is some kind of machine acting on your behalf is where the agent stuff comes in. So everyone's starting to talk about agentic, everyone's thinking about this, this is where everyone thinks it goes. But there's no real answer in spite of like all of the tools and technologies and everything that you're starting to see out there, because the LLMs are not really good at consistency. They're great at the things that we didn't think they'd be great at. So they're great brainstorming partners. That's how we use them at Charm and like all this other stuff. And we specifically at Charm stayed way the heck away from all of this like system-y kind of stuff. Like we are not an integration platform and all this other stuff, primarily because that's where they're terrible. They're really good at all the other stuff. So again, what's fascinating with all of this is everyone's looking for a way and a thing for, everyone's looking for a toehold with these things. I would say, again, we at Charm are really the only kind of people that are using in part of our process as a thought process rather than using them in our mechanical process. But again, people are trying to slot them in everywhere. So what I'm trying to really boil this down to is all that deep research is you give it a question, it takes that question and it basically turns it into the equivalent of a Google search. And then it performs that Google search and it brings back a bunch of document references. And up to this point, so if you look at the grounded with Google search or even Perplexity for that matter, people who use search results and bring them in, typically all that they would do is take those search results and they would take your question, they would take those search results, they would give them to the LLM and they would say, make sense of what the person asked for given these results. And then that would be what that is. So effectively, that's, for the most part, what Perplexity does. That's what Grounded with Google Search does in Gemini. I would say OpenAI doesn't really have a good answer here. And so what Google did when they first did the deep research thing is they said, well, what if we have it iterate on that? What if we, because if there's one thing that the large language models are actually good at is if you tell it to like try again or like check if there's a problem and see if you can do better. If you go through this kind of constant iteration, they're actually really good at that.
Yes.
So that's all they did is they basically, user gives a question, questions handed in, it comes up with it internally, comes up with a set of search results. It hands those search results back to the LLM. The LLM either will get a search result or it will say, okay, these look good. Actually go grab those documents and bring them back in whole. Let me read that document. Let me see, let me take your question. Let me put it against that document. Let me summarize it. Let me do things and let me move that. And so it goes through this process, this very agentic process of multiple steps on your behalf, which again, take question, turn it into Google search, get results, bring those back. Are the results containing other information? Should I go another step? You know, imagine you go to a web page and you're looking for something and you got to the page, but it doesn't have your exact answer, but there's another link on that page that then does go somewhere. So then it decides, should I follow that link? And then it'll go search that document. So I know this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but I really want folks to walk away with the fact that this is really the first agentic workflow that is being injected into our lives that is kind of, you should look at it as the canary in the coal mine. So every single process that you can think of that involves some little piece of glue that the human does, which if you think about it, research is just, I'm not trying to belittle or underestimate the amount of things that go into research, but when you think about the early phases, all you're doing is you're doing Google searches, you're bringing back documents, you're trying to figure out, do those documents reflect the search you're going for? If not, where do you go? How do you find more documents? And you're just trying to put all of that information together. And then once you have all those documents, you're just trying to distill it down to like the major themes so that you can then take that and then, you know, move forward with whatever you were doing. And again, that's what these deep research tools are doing. It's allowing these agents to go on your behalf, search the internet, grab these search results, bring them back, figure out if there's more results, and then keep going.
Yeah, you mentioned Perplexity. They're gaining popularity. You know, they're promising cited sources for every answer, supposedly making the research more transparent and trustworthy, right? When you get the cited sources. Yet many users, including myself, are finding those citations sometimes unreliable, often maybe irrelevant, or sometimes like even fabricated, right? So what happens when those sources turn out to be questionable or completely fabricated or wrong? And does this focus on citations create a false sense of security when using AI to kind of conduct these kind of deeper research?
Great set of questions. Amazing set of questions, because that's literally the next step, which is, okay, so two things. One is, well, why don't we have agentic systems today? Like, why don't we see more of them? And the short answer is that at every one of those steps that the LLM goes through, there's some probability, just like with a human, but in the case of LLMs, they tend to spin off in crazy places. They tend to be overly exuberant in their success metrics. They can go off track. And what you'll find is, I don't wish to speak ill of anyone's product, like we're all starting, but I would just say I get horrible results from Perplexity. And the main reason is I think they underestimated just how hard it is to be Google. Google has been doing search and doing search well. Yeah. And we've all forgotten how hard search was. Like, we don't remember the Alta Vista days or the Yahoo days and everything else. Like, search is hard. Like, if you remember when it first came out, it was terrible.
I was there for it. I was there.
You were at Yahoo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And And so what I think everyone's level of expectation of a search engine is very high. Again, Google has set that bar extremely high. And when you get back Perplexity's results, if you only look at the citations, I would say at best 50% of them are way off course. And what sucks is that, again, if you think about what the agents are doing, is it's literally just taking those search results, which another system gave it, and it's like, use these. And it takes that information and it just makes up, well, it tries to make it make sense. It's like if you've ever handed something wrong to an intern and they don't want to tell you that they don't know what's going on, they'll just try to make it all up, right? Like, I got to do something. I was given this stuff.
Right.
So that's one side of it. The other side, actually, I shouldn't say left and right because there's lots of sides on this whole thing. You asked, like, does the citations give you a little bit of blindness? And if you only look at the results and you look at the fact that every one of these things have citations on them, you do get lulled into a false sense of security because you can be fairly certain that it did pull that information from that source, but you must go to that source. And I've seen so many times where, again, like 50% of the time, where you read this thing and you're like, oh, that's amazing. And then you look down at the citation and you're like, wow, that ain't from anything that I was actually asking about. So while that statement is correct, it has nothing to do with all the rest of this stuff.
Right.
So I would say a few things here, which is, yeah, you do, if you're not literally looking at every single citation and source that these things are coming from, like, you must do that. And I would say the same thing is true if you bring your intern in the first time. Like, if you get your right out of college interns, like, you got to do the same amount of work. As somebody who's employed lots and lots of interns, like, that's why I'm okay with the way these tools are working today. Because I'm like, yeah, no, that's how this works.
Right.
But on the flip side, you just have to remember, like, when OpenAI or Deep Research or whatever chews through something for you for 20 minutes and gives you back a result, you don't know that if on step one, it went off in the weeds. So, just to talk about how we think about these things at Charm, that's why I made Charm and it's kind of funny because it's ironic, I made Charm a no magic zone, even though we obviously have the charm and the magic connotation.
Right.
We made it a no magic zone because we're way too early right now in these tools. I never want to give somebody an agentic workflow that goes through 5 steps. Like, we tell everybody, look at the result. And I would say most of the time, again, if you spend time in Charm working with your charms, most of the time you're correcting them and you're doing these edits and everything else. If that was in some flow where it's just building upon itself, by the 6th step, you're like, it's like, how do you move the Titanic, right? It's very slowly, but you move it 1 degree at a time, and by the time it gets there, sure, it clips the iceberg a little bit, but it's turned. And the same thing is true with these agents, which again, I give. So there's 2 sides. There's one is the optimistic side of me, which is like, this is crazy. Like, as a species, we should look at this and say, we have handed this aspect of our lives to these machines, and it's just the first instance of this little piece where, again, the piece is take question, do internet research, decide if you need to do more, and summarize, right? Like, that used to be somebody's job, and now we've kind of delegated it. And you just think about all of the other things that you do that are just like these little blocks of you that get injected in there. Now imagine you're just slowly cherry picking those things away and putting the machine in every one of those. Right. And then you realize really quickly how much of our jobs is not that much, right? Like, there's not a lot of there. So again, again, my optimistic side, which this is super exciting to see this stuff. And on the worrisome side of me, I'm like, this kind of just got slotted in, and I don't think anyone's kind of paying attention, like, what this means in the global ecosystem of agentic systems and like where our lives are going. So again, sorry, long-winded answer, but there's a lot to unpack.
I love the long-winded answers. You get me thinking, you get me interested, you help me cut through like kind of the clutter. So automating tasks, right? Like, the human element, the human participant is still so important, not only in researching, but like kind of everything. It's more like, how do we partner with AI? How do we partner with the LLMs? And so how can researchers, and I mean researchers, you don't have to be a scientist or a doctor or curing cancer. It could be like me helping my son research a project
Everything.
for his ninth grade class. So
Your
how
next
can,
trip, your
yeah,
next, your next food purchase, for pity's
anything
sake.
like,
It's all research.
so how can we researchers actually partner with these tools to push the boundaries of discovery? And let me ask you a couple questions in that question is like, can AI help us fundamentally, you know, ask different questions, explore like uncharted territories, or make connections that we might have not seen on our own, right? Like, so what are the most exciting ways you envision AI augmenting human intellect, because we're still really important in the process and in the research process? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, some great questions there. So what's really interesting here is, so again, I believe in the no magic policy right
Yes.
now. I believe that we all need to be aware of what these tools are doing, because they're so, like, if I would have mentioned all this to you 2 years ago, you'd have been like, you're talking funny. Like, what are you smoking, dude? And now, like, we have 3 or 4 of these things that are available to us. So that's 2 years. Like, in another 2 years, we're going to be having a very, very different conversation.
Yes.
So yes, these tools are not good. You should not be relying on them to do what it is that you need to do if it's something important. But you do need to be aware of what they're doing, how they do it, where your benefits are, where their benefits are. Because as we always say, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to be losing your job to the person who's using AI. And I can guarantee you that you need to be learning how these tools work, because they're going to be moving fast, and you will definitely lose out without them. So you have to keep aware of these things, even though, again, we know that they're not good. But yes, what's also interesting is every one of these weird, sometimes odd mistakes that are made, you get interesting serendipity out of those. And I know it can be hard when you're like trying to get a task done and you're just trying to focus to not embrace the serendipity. But I have found so many times where I'm like, wait a minute, like why did it think that? Like, and what I find is that you get so used to talking with people, especially people in your same domains. But again, remember that these LLMs are effectively blanketed across all domains, so it can confuse lots of the things that you may be saying, and because it's not used to talking to you in your specific domain. So again, what I find fascinating is the serendipitous answers that comes out. And again, my ability to reflect on, like, why did that happen? Like, if I gave this to somebody who did not know what I was talking about, like, would they have made a similar mistake? And it's like, oh yeah, I didn't mention these parts. So I have found that I have become a much better communicator, though long-winded, as you can tell, a much better communicator, because I now am more aware of like who I'm talking to and what they may be aware of and so forth. Because again, I've been working with these LLMs, and it's like, oh, when I say that, they may not understand what I mean there. So yeah, those are kind of the things. Play with the tools, because you kind of have to. If you're doing research, again, use them on the side. You have to do the work anyway, so
Right.
just do it side by side. You do your work, let it do its, and maybe you got one it didn't get. And what's nice with some of these systems, you just give it what you got and just say like, hey, you went here. Like, is there something I'm missing here? Ask it questions, be inquisitive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that answer, and I love that, so I talk to a lot of people about AI and integrating that into either workflows or just like your day to day, and how do you become more productive, right? I always say it like, think of the charms or the assistants as your team. Speak to them like they're an intern, speak to
Yeah.
them like they're your designer, speak to them like they're a lawyer, right? Like, really have conversations, right?
Yeah.
Have conversations, validate the information. When they make mistakes, and when my charms make mistakes, I let them know. I'm like, hey, that doesn't sound right. And they say, Shalene, you're right. And I'm like, thank you for that validation. So finally, looking into the future, what does all this mean for researchers? And researchers, me, you, doctors, everyone. What skills will researchers need to thrive in this kind of AI-driven research landscape? And how should institutions and organizations, whether you're a startup or CEO of a Fortune 500 company, how should we adapt? You sort of touched on those pieces, but I'd love to get a couple more insights from you, because I think what I'm really hearing from you and getting out of this conversation is the human element is still so important in the relationship with the machine. And we still play a very important part, like a manager, like a mentor, right? Like a leader. So I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So again, great questions. I really appreciate these kind of thought-provoking things, and especially tying it back to okay. So how do I use this? You know, every tool has the opportunity to be a game changer for you. Everything you kind of bring in can be really helpful, right? So we're gaining this unprecedented ability to do things we couldn't before, right? So I can go in and I can go run 5 different, even if it's the same thing, but I can run 5 different in parallel researches. And sure, some of them might be wrong, but on the flip side, I would never have had that ability before.
Right.
So again, you should always look at these tools and see, like, is there some efficiency to be gained here, or what market has always been there, but it hasn't been tractable because you couldn't do these things. Now you can do super cheap research and maybe just fan it out. Maybe you do that. Maybe you give it the blue sky things that you never would have had time to do before. And sure, maybe you get 1 out of 100, but that's, the standard saying, you can't win the shots that you don't take, right? So
Right.
now you would have never taken those before because you just didn't have anybody. Whereas now it's like, sure, create a spending budget and say, like, I'm gonna spend $50 this week and I'm gonna like do 10 researches that I would have never done before. And again, if one of them lands, like, that's the best $50 you've ever spent.
Exactly.
So why would you not do that? Like, why?
Right.
Like, again, everyone looks at these. Just to say, on a kind of a personal side, I've been kind of working with some academics lately on some other things that I'm working on and thinking about. And what's been so fascinating is, they're always used to being the smartest in the block, right? Like, literally by definition, when you have a PhD and you are the top of your field, like, that's what you are. And so it's interesting to hear them reflect on these tools. They're always like nitpicking about, oh, it got this wrong, or it got this wrong, or it got this wrong. And I'm like, but it got the other 400 things right. It's like,
Right.
Why aren't you rejoicing in the benefits that you could be getting from this thing rather than nitpicking the 1 or 2 things? So again, to balance out this conversation, yeah, 50% of the crap that I get back sometimes from these things is terrible. But again, sometimes, so I'll just use one prime example that I've gotten. We were trying to think of a way to demo Charm to regular people, and it's really hard to figure out something common between everyone. And the machine literally came back to me and it's like, well, the most common thing you have between everyone you're trying to demo Charm to is Charm itself. Right. So it literally came up with the name Charmception as a way of talking about the Christopher Nolan movie Inception, this notion of a dream within a dream within a dream. And its statement was, kind of like the Russian dolls, like, you're doing a demo of a demo within a demo. And I would have never in a million, billion, trillion years came up with the notion of using Charm to use Charm and then come up with the term Charmception. And this was all from the machine. And again, had I not made that roll of the dice, and if I would have just said, well, this thing gets stuff wrong all the time and I don't know what to do, I would have never got that insight out of it. So, and again, this is fully parallelizable. I can kick off a whole bunch of these processes. So I would say that, which is, again, even if you're a researcher who's using these tools, again, they're not that expensive. Why wouldn't you just try? And again, if you don't, because I'll just say, like, a lot of the Charm users that we have don't actually tell their bosses that they use Charm.
Right.
And there's a whole discussion to be had about what that means and everything else. But, like, you don't have to tell your boss that you used a tool to help you get what you got. But again, if you made 50 rolls and 2 of those rolls were amazing while you also did your job, like, again, this is how these things are going to help you. So why wouldn't you do that? Why is it not part of your process? And you already have the skills as a researcher to scrutinize it and to look through it. So, like, you already know what you're doing. Now you just have more coming in. So anyway, that was a long-winded as usual, but hopefully it gave you a way to think about it.
Definitely provided clarity, very insightful. I think it's, I always think back to the internet, the start of the internet, like me growing up. I didn't grow up with the internet till I was in college, right? Early college days. And, everything I did as a student, it was a set of encyclopedias that my parents bought from like a door-to-door salesman. And I remember it was like $1,000 for these books, leather bound.
Yeah.
They were coveted, right?
Yeah.
It took a very long time to get the information, to find the information and citing the sources. But the LLMs, they are so smart. They are so fast, but they still take our help. our guidance. We're managing them
Yep.
from the way we speak to them, whether it's a prompt or a conversation. I'm very conversational with my charms. And I learned that early on because I would sit and type away and I would look up prompts and I would try to figure out the best way is me having a conversation with the machine.
Talk to them.
Because they're on my team, they're on my staff,
Yep.
right? But I have to check their work.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes me invaluable in this process. The human connection, the human management, the human connection to the machine is still so important at this time. And I think I gained that from this conversation that we had today. And it's clarifying, it's insightful. You, as always, you help us cut through the hype and through the noise and through kind of all the questions to get to the heart of what AI means for the future of research and the future of us, right? It's not just about faster searches, which Google was so great at, and you know, we're seeing a lot of that across the platforms, but it's about the fundamental shift of how we think, how we discover, and how we understand, right? So for everyone watching, I hope this discussion has empowered you to engage with AI tools more critically and creatively. If you haven't started, it's never too late. And if you're already, you know, using ChatGPT or using Perplexity or kind of exploring all of that, that's great. Hopefully this conversation gives you more tools in your arsenal, how to be a better manager and mentor to these machines because they need you. And if you haven't already, please explore CharmIQ to continue your own AI augmentation thinking, like how you interact with them. And if I can give you any quick hacks or tips, it's like, treat them like a person that reports to you, your best friend, your mentor, your boss. And Rob, any last minute thoughts or, you know, tips or tricks to the audience watching today before we conclude?
Stay curious. That if this process we're going through here is an absolutely human process of discovery, and remain curious, go out there, play, learn. It's an amazing time to be alive.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's not a huge investment. It's not you know, $1,000 back in, you know, the early 80s to buy some encyclopedias that sit on your shelf, right? It's investing in you, and it's investing with a machine that will make you more curious, that will 100% make you more productive, make you more engaged. So join us next time for continuing the conversation. Rob, thank you again for joining me, and I can't wait to talk to you next week.
Can't wait till next week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, guys.